So we know that history has been made after El Salvador became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as its legal tender, as its national currency. And obviously, there's a lot of hype around crypto, but that is usually from an investment point of view. What I want to talk about is the economic implications of a country adopting Bitcoin as its legal tender. So there's a very famous book called The Economic Hitman by John Perkins, where John basically kind of gives an account of his own life and how he basically operated as an economic hitman. And the theme of the book is, how first world countries, especially the United States, they subdue weaker nations into debt. They pump leverage into weaker nations, in hope of unrealistic economic growth. They convince the weaker nations, the financially underdeveloped nations, to take on not just more debt than they can handle, but also at a higher interest rate than what is reasonable. And that higher interest rate is usually, convinced upon by giving unrealistic expectations of future growth. So if the growth is, for example, 10%, so the interest rate will be, let's say, around 6%. But if you make the expected projections 25-30%, so you can charge 15-20% interest. So basically, the implication of an economic hitman doing his job, and basically first world countries leveraging, putting the underdeveloped countries into a lot of debt at a high interest rate, is that those countries obviously do not experience the growth which was shown to them as a false mirage, but they have to anyway pay back the debt at a very high interest rate. So what they do is that they end up printing a lot of money to pay back the debt, right? And that, and amongst other factors, this is just one of the factors, but the thing is that all of these things, printing more money and high amount of debt and all other factors combined, lead to inflation in a nation, and inflation leads to money losing its value, and it leads to hyperinflation as well sometimes, when the money completely becomes worthless. And all this happens because central banks can print money at will. There is infinite amount of fiat currency, whether that is the US dollar or the Saudi riyal or the Indian rupees, or any currency of a African country or Indonesia or Philippines. So these are fiat currencies. It's not backed by any finite material, right? So because of this, it leads to hyperinflation. It leads to a lack of stability. But El Salvador adopting Bitcoin, is really a paradigm shift, because Bitcoin has a fixed supply of 21 million. It cannot be increased, right? And most of that is already mined. So when a country adopts a deflationary currency instead of inflationary, so that is really something which we haven't seen since a few centuries. Like, we went off the gold standard quite some time ago, right? And almost every country experiences inflation, and one of the mandates of the country's respective central banks is to basically fight inflation, or to keep inflation at a bare minimum, usually 2% per annum, right, or 3% per annum. But what happens when a country, especially a financially weak, subdued country, adopts as its legal tender something which is limited in supply, like Bitcoin? How will bigger countries, send their economic hitmans to such nations with a currency like Bitcoin? How will they subdue a country like El Salvador after it has adopted Bitcoin? Because now they cannot really experience inflation, right? Because they can never print more Bitcoin. So this is really a paradigm shift, and I'm still exploring, and I'm still thinking about how this is going to change the macroeconomic picture of the globe as a whole. As more countries adopt Bitcoin and Ethereum, which will soon become deflationary, after Ethereum 2.0 upgrade comes into effect. completely. So when countries start adopting a deflationary currency, so what implications will that have on the macroeconomic outlook of the globe? That is something to really think about. And I'll see you in the next one.